Howdy, I'd like to talk about immigration for a few minutes as an issue of national sovereignty. I think that the immigration debate has been framed incorrectly, and particularly the characterization of the supposed bipartisan immigration bill that was put forward in the last few months. And I'd like to just talk through immigration and touch on that bill just for a second. So, immigration, an issue of national sovereignty. As we think about immigration, no country is obligated to develop an immigration policy based on why people want to come into the country. That is not the concern. The only concern for the country is what it needs. The primary cause of the immigration debate is a failure of Congress to pass policy that addresses the immigration issues that have been building over the last 40 years. The amnesty under President Reagan was supposed to be followed by comprehensive reform. That didn't happen, and consistently since then, there's been no policy correctives or direction provided by Congress. The big problem today is the failure to distinguish between legal and illegal immigration. I would suggest that a lot of the debate is muddied, perhaps intentionally, by people who try to lump legal immigration in the same basket as illegal immigration, when in fact those are two separate issues. If we had clearer immigration policy, then we would perhaps have less concern or less incentive for people to try to enter illegally, and it would be clearer with respect to what we ought to do when people enter illegally. The immigration issue has been exacerbated by President Biden and Vice President Harris's effectively open border policy, with upwards of 8 million people and counting entering illegally. Some say as high as 10 or 15 million entering illegally. There's little dispute or little debate or a little point in trying to debate whether or not it's been an open border or not, because we have millions of people entering illegally. The wrong focus, I would suggest, has been established by President Biden and his team. The failure of President Biden's administration to deal effectively with the immigration issue stems in part from a failure of focus. The focus of U.S. immigration policy should not be on so-called root causes, President Biden's focus.
Well, thank you, Mr. President, and for having the confidence in me. And there's no question that this is a challenging situation. As the President has said, there are many factors that lead President to leave these countries. And while we are clear that people should not come to the border now, we also understand that we will enforce the law, and that we also, because we can chew gum and walk at the same time, must address the root causes.
The focus of U.S. immigration policy should be on what the U.S. will gain from the policy that is put in place. It isn't a matter of why people want to come. It's whether or not we wish to allow them or need them to come. And until we get that sorted out, all the discussions about immigration policy are going to be coming at it from the wrong perspective. So Vice President Kamala Harris, borders all failure. There's a lot of debate now about whether or not Vice President was named the border czar.
Liberal media is going a full Soviet Union, trying to erase from history that Kamala Harris was the border czar. This is just a small sample of numerous gaslighting headlines pushing the, quote, myth of Kamala Harris as border czar. But the worst offender was Axios, which promoted a similar lie. But it turns out that they'd labeled Kamala Harris as Biden's border czar 3 years ago. And it doesn't get any better with the TV pundits.
This will be her first visit to the U.S.-Mexico border region since she was appointed as the border czar by President Biden.
She is now the point person on immigration.
Kamala Harris, who was appointed as the border czar, hasn't gone there at all.
She's supposed to be the border czar.
He's putting his vice president, Kamala Harris, in charge of this.
The unofficial border czar. There has been so much criticism against Kamala Harris. You know, she was the border czar.
As noted earlier, the problem she faced was in part a problem of President Biden's misguided policy focus, reflected in how Vice President Harris approached the issue.
And so the question has come up, and you heard it here, and you'll hear it again, I'm sure. It's why not visit the border? Why not see what Americans are seeing in this crisis?
Well, we are going to the border. We have to deal with what's happening at the border. There's no question about that. That's not a debatable point. But we have to understand that there's a reason people are arriving at our border, and ask what is that reason, and then identify the problem so we can fix it. I'm in Guatemala because my focus is dealing with the root causes of migration. There may be some who think that that is not important, but it is my firm belief that if we care about what's happening at the border, we better care about the root causes and address them. And so that's what I'm doing.
Rather than addressing the issue responsibly, Vice President Harris and her supporters began talking about how she had been given a no-win issue with which to deal. However, if Vice President Harris wins the presidential election, who does she think will be responsible for the border and immigration policy then? I would suggest that Vice President Harris would be in a much stronger position as a presidential candidate had she, in fact, accepted the criticisms with respect to how she was handling the border and pivoted to deal with the issues that America was concerned about rather than trying to split hairs over what her particular role was, since, as Vice President, people were looking to her for border solutions. President Biden's failed immigration policies. As a candidate, President Biden called for immigrants to come to the U.S. as a symbol of America's goodness.
I would in fact make sure that we immediately surge to the border. All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard. That's who we are. We're a nation that says if you want to flee and you're fleeing oppression, you should come.
From the beginning of his presidency, President Biden sought to rescind many of President Trump's immigration policies, including the Stay in Mexico policy and stopping construction of the border wall.
This is about how America is safer, stronger, more prosperous when we have a fair, orderly, and humane legal immigration system. And with the first action today, we're going to work to undo the moral and national shame of the previous administration that literally, not figuratively, ripped children from the arms of their families, their mothers and fathers at the border, and with no plan, none whatsoever, to reunify the children who are still in custody and their parents. The second action addresses the root causes of our migration to our southern border. And the third action, the third order I'm going to be signing, orders a full review of the previous administration's harmful and counterproductive immigration policies, basically across the board. And so with that, I'm going to sign the first order.
While major border towns like here in El Paso, Texas are always busy, they are getting even busier. Why the big change? Well, some experts say it's in part to a new American president with more hospitable immigration policies, including changes that are set to take effect here in El Paso this week.
25 people will be able to enter the United States this Friday.
Linda Rivas is with Las Americas Immigrant Advocacy Center. On Friday, non-citizens seeking asylum will begin walking across the Paso del Norte Bridge. President Biden made the change earlier this month. Under former President Trump, asylum seekers had to wait in Mexico until their immigration hearing. It's estimated 26,000 migrants are now eligible to return to the U.S.
The process is supposed to be very secure, very orderly, COVID safe.
For the moment, President Biden is only allowing 25 to 30 people each day, but that will increase to 300 or so soon.
President Biden insisted for 3 years that he could not do anything about the border, that it was up to Congress, which he had been part of for 36 years plus 8 years as vice president. Then, facing criticism in an election year, he delivered an executive order which again mirrored President Trump's policies, trying to reverse the failure of his policies to date.
I rise in strong support of this resolution introduced by my colleague, Representative Stefanik. In March of 2021, an Axios headline declared, quote, "Biden puts Harris in charge of the border crisis." According to this article, quote, "The first goal will be stemming the flow of illegal migrants to the U.S." The chart next to me shows the cumulative southwest border encounters for the first 42 months of the last 6 presidential terms. The red line represents the Biden-Harris administration. Look at the chart and ask yourself, how did Vice President Harris do as the person in charge of the border? In June 2021, Vice President Harris said, quote, "If you come to our border, you will be turned back." Look at that chart and ask yourself if anyone took her warning seriously. In September of 2022, Vice President Harris said, quote, "The border is secure." Look at that chart and ask yourself if it was then or if it is now. Mr. Speaker, the Venn diagram of border security and the Biden-Harris administration is 2 separate circles.
Democratic senators and Republican Senator Lankford, who sacrificed his conservative bona fides, proposed a disastrous immigration bill. Border policy begins with control of the border, determining who can come in under what circumstances. Amongst the egregious failures of the bill was a proposal to cap the entry of illegal immigrants to 5,000 per day, which maxed out would be 1,825,000 per year. Legal immigration is capped at 675,000 permanent immigrant visas for 2024. Irrespective of President Trump's influence in stopping the passage of the legislation, it was bad legislation. As the leader of the Republican Party, it is hardly a negative talking point to say that President Trump demonstrated leadership on a critical political issue. We need legislative action to establish a clear policy on immigration based on the needs of the country and enforced by the executive and judicial branches of our government. The needs of people in other countries should not be the basis of any nation's decisions on how to handle immigration. Those issues should be addressed by other means. But a nation without a border and a clear policy as to who is allowed in the country through that border is not, in fact, a nation. Thank you very much for your time. I've got a couple other videos listed here if you'd like to take a look at those, and as I'd like to discuss issues related to politics, religion, society, and how in the world we're supposed to understand ourselves and life in the world. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Bye-bye.